Hello. Here, here's stoner version of why there is the electoral college and why we should abolish it. So when you hear people talk about electoral college, I haven't watched any videos recently, but I watched him before. They explain like how it works, and but I don't really recall them explaining like the whole story. And so the reason that we have the electoral college is so that we can have aristocracy baked into our Constitution, so that we're not completely democratic, like ancient Athens was completely democratic. All the men who weren't slaves could go in and vote on whoever they wanted to be their leader and different things. Like one vote, one man. But most countries aren't democratic to that extent, completely one vote, one man Democrat. They have, most of them have a balance baked into them, where it's part democracy, part aristocracy, and then so you could kind of get like the best of both worlds, maybe part like kingdom. And so that's one thing that was good about Rome. People said of Rome, like when people visited Rome from other city-states, they would come back and they'd be like, so what's the Constitution of Rome? And they'd say, oh, we can't really tell if it's a democracy, aristocracy, or kingdom, because it's perfectly balanced. And they prided themselves on that because it kept it the most stable. They learned that idea from Aristotle, who had a famous saying. See, look, the little bird. Oh, that's when I was vlogging. The little bird's hanging out up there now. Aristotle came up with the saying that the idea that the word revolution is when one country goes from one political system to another, because they would constantly revolve around just depending on the situation of the country. And so to make it more stable, what you want to do is have everything balanced. And so the comparison he made is like the face of a person. Like the nose would represent the aristocratical element, the mouth would represent the democratic, and then the eyes would represent the king. And so if one of them gets too big, it deforms the face and it makes it not beautiful, and if it gets too big, it doesn't even serve its function. And he gave the example of like a boat. Once a boat gets too big, it can't be used as a boat. And that's why Rome prided themselves on having the balance. And in their constitution, the way that they had it set up was like they could flip back and forth instead of becoming like a dictatorship because of a crisis. They figured out a way to bake into their constitution where they could become a temporary dictatorship from crisis. So the best example of that was Cincinnatus, who was a general from like a long time ago, like a generation ago, and now he was like really old, like 70 or something, and They needed him to fight. They needed a general to fight the Volsky in the south, and they recruited him. And so he fought a perfect battle and won every battle, and in 16 days, and then the war was over, and so he just gave it back and went back to farm his 4-acre farm right across the Tiber, and so they said, oh, we want to be like Cincinnatus, and so they did that a bunch of times, where they would become a temporary dictatorship because that's when their general gained control of the whole country, so that he could use the resources of the whole country to win the war. So he was a dictator. He was like in charge of all of it. But then once it was over, he gave it up and they went back. So that's the way how they would balance that. But then the balanced democratic with aristocratic and kingship. Their consuls were like the kings, only they had 2 consuls that would change turns. I think it was like one consul and then another consul the next day and then another consul. So they balanced each other's out. So they had the kingship was like that. Like when they moved from a kingdom to a republic in 509, the first consuls, Brutus and Cassius, they adopted everything from the kingdom. Like they had the same scepter, the same crown, the same throne, and the same powers. And the only difference was you only got to be a consul for a year, and you had to share it with another consul, and you had to be elected. So they maintained the dictatorship for the wars, the kingdom with the consuls, but they maintained the democracy by them having to be elected as consuls, and they maintained the aristocracy by having the consuls check each other and having the Senate, which was like 400 guys who would all sit together and chat. So it was a perfect balance of all of it. So when the United States founding fathers in the 1770s were writing the Constitution, that was right after Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws came out in 1762, which was inspired by Aristotle's Politics. It's basically the same type of book. Those are basically the 2 only types of books I can think of that are purely where they examine laws and why they're laws based on the situation, and acknowledging that different laws are different depending on the situation that they're in. People kind of have a habit of thinking that the laws should be the same everywhere, and that laws change. And so they were they referenced Montesquieu, but when you read the Federalist Papers, which is written by the founding fathers that wrote the Constitution, so it's kind of like the explanation of the Constitution. It's a pretty big book. It's like 165 chapters, and the whole book, it's like 300, 400 pages or something. And it was originally written as like just documents in the newspaper, like the New York Times or the Boston Herald, and the authors were anonymous because I guess they didn't want to get caught by the British, because if they were caught as traitors, they get beheaded. And if we lost the war for independence, all of our founding fathers would have been executed by England. But when they wrote the Federalist Papers, they were trying to talk about what to have as a country, like how to design the country, and they were the most, very educated generation of people in an educated country, because it was right after it was like right up at the end of the the French kingdom, And Montesquieu just came out with his book, and all the other philosophers had recently come out with their books, and so they referenced Montesquieu, but they referenced Rome and Greece heavily. In fact, their names that they used were, all of them named themselves after famous Romans. One of them was Publius, which was one of the first consuls of Rome. One named himself like Gracchus, from one of the Gracchi brothers. And but they were what the Federalist Papers are is basically a history lesson. They're like history books of Roman political system, and all these different city-states from ancient Greece. And so they were talking about, because the Federalists wrote the Federalist Papers, and then the Anti-Federalists wrote the Anti-Federalist Papers. And they were kind of like the Democrats versus Republicans. They were like central power of authority versus dispersed power. Kind of like maybe like the central city having the power, shining city on the hill, like Rome, versus like a federation like Switzerland. And so the Federalists were like for I guess for the federation where they were talking about the power of the states, and then the Anti-Federalists, I think, were more trying to model it more like off of a king. And so in the Federalists but the Federalist Papers are more popular, more famous, because it was written by the guys who wrote the Constitution. But the Federalist Papers are just talking about what Aristotle was talking about, where you'd want to have a balance, and and so they were talking about how to write that into the Constitution. And so they said, okay, well, yeah, let's have it. They wanted to make it something that would last and be stable, but it would also be something scalable, because they were at the beginning of Manifest Destiny. They already, Lewis and Clark in 1806 had those guys had made it all the way to the other side, and they just knew that they were going to grow and get more states, and so they wanted it to be able to be steady, because when they wrote the Constitution, people outside the building said, "So what is it? Is it a kingdom or a democracy?" And Thomas Jefferson said, "A democracy if you can keep it." So they figured that they wanted to have a good balance between all the different forms of government. So they wanted to have democracy. They wanted so that's why you call it a republic and not a democracy. Democracy is like Athens, like one man, one vote for everything, and that's it. A republic is where you write in a constitution, a good constitution, then you follow all the rules in the Constitution, you have amendments. So they wanted to have the democracy where you would vote in who the president was, and originally the president and vice president were both voted separately, but the only people who could vote were landowner males, which is how it was in ancient Rome, because they had slaves in ancient Rome, and they did in America in the beginning, and it was only the landowners could vote. And then you vote in the president, so that's the kingdom part, and so that's like the consul of Rome. And the president rules from Washington, D.C., which is like Rome. So then they were like, well, what do we do about the aristocracy part? And so that could be like the governors of the different states and stuff. But they didn't think that was enough. And here's where the Electoral College comes in. They thought that because if America was going to be really big, only a few number of people were going to be able to travel the huge distance back to Washington, D.C. to deliberate and know what's going on with all the data that they need, and to be able to communicate and be educated. And so they figured they would bake in the aristocratic part of it by giving the leaders of the different states a oversized influence on the election of the president, because they thought that the people who lived in those different states they would suffer from the problem of democracy, where it would be mob rule, and a demagogue would come up and thwart the power of the president by maybe succeeding or not cooperating or making it too hard to elect the president. And so to consolidate the power in the capital, they came up with the electoral college, where the different governors could get their own votes and elect the president, and as a safeguard. But the problem is, it backfired, because what they didn't consider, or what ended up happening, was that the way that the Constitution works is that it all is bound together. It's all tied together like a bunch of straps holding a bunch of things together, so that you can drive down the road without stuff flying out. It's all related. So if one part of it goes, then the other parts of it don't have proper support. And so the whole Constitution can start to get unraveled. Because when they wrote the Constitution and they had the idea of having the different electors have power to vote in the president, they figured, okay, yeah, the electors are going to be the educated people. You rely on the aristocracy because you need a certain class of educated people with resources to help guide the country the same way that the Constitution guides everybody with the laws that we follow. You would follow the Constitution, but you also follow the old wise men. Because originally in city-states and polities, you wouldn't even really have a constitution that organized, written. It's more like a collection of decrees, like with Solomon, ancient Solomon and Judah. It's just a collection of all the decrees they made, and then you get a picture of what a great wise old man would be like, and you try to mimic him. But a proper polity or republic is where you actually write the laws down and then you follow the laws. But you would also, along with that, trust the educated people, and you would expect them to uphold the balance of everything. But the problem is, if those people who are supposed to be old wise men, educated, are not the cream of the crop, then they're going to vote against everybody's will to help them, kind of like how rich people are the bane of society. So you have like two other safeguards built into the Constitution, along with the Electoral College. You also have the Emoluments Clause, and you have the Traitor Clause. So in the Constitution, you have a clause written where you're not allowed to take money. You're supposed to do your job for your salary, and that's it. You're supposed to work for the country. That's why you're elected in democratically. So if you break the Emoluments Clause, like we have been with the Citizens United and breaking Glass-Steagall, and then where you can do campaign donations, so people can buy themselves in, and then you become a fascist. And so, which is happening now, like everybody in the cabinet, in Trump's cabinet is now like a rich person because they paid him. They bought themselves in. Linda McMahon, Elon Musk, Miriam Adelson, and then those other politicians who were bought. So, if people can buy themselves in, then they're not aristocracy. Now it's more oligarchy. It's and so now they're not more educated. They're just richer. And then along with the traitor clause, if you lead a rebellion or participate in a rebellion against America, you can't run again. It's literally written just like that in the Constitution. Well, Donald Trump led the rebellion, and then he ran again and then won. So now we're not even paying attention to two clauses that are very clear in the Constitution. And what that does is it sets a precedent to just break more clauses. For example, the First Amendment establishment of a religion clause. They could break that by spending more federal money on religion or only a certain religion, Christianity, and then making laws like Bible in the schools, which is all owned by the country. And then once they do that enough, they'll be like, well, why is that clause in the Constitution? Those dumbass founding fathers hundreds of years ago must have had their heads up their asses. I don't even know what they were thinking because we don't read. Take it out. And they're like, well, while we're at it, let's take the thing out about the traitor rebellion. Take that out because we don't pay attention to that. And let's take the emoluments thing out. That's ridiculous. We don't pay attention to that, right? And so now we're taking stuff out. And then you can start adding new clauses like what Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to do, make the voting age 25. Maybe make it only rich people who have a certain amount of money. You actually get regressive. And all of that happened. That thread started to come untangled, and the snowball started to take over, all from, not paying attention to the emoluments clause and the traitor clause, mainly the emoluments clause, which gets the wrong people in, oligarchs instead of aristocracy, in to the electoral college, and so it's proof of that is like the electoral college was the one that actually got the president over the last couple times, even though they lost the popular vote. George Bush Sr. lost popular vote by millions of votes, but he became president because the electoral college went against the will of the people because he was a business and getting rich people richer, Republican. And then Donald Trump, same thing. He lost to Hillary Clinton, popular vote, but won electoral college, so became president. And then even last time with Biden almost won because of the electoral college. And then this time he smoked Kamala Harris with the electoral college. More than, I think, proportionally, than he won the popular vote, which people are thinking was kind of cheated anyway. I don't know, but yeah, so, and of course, now he's talking about a third term, and he's saying he didn't believe that he thought he was robbed of his election. So people are starting to, like the Constitution after 250 years is starting to come unraveled. And so we should re-examine the Electoral College. So the Electoral College was the idea that the electors were the smarter because they were more in tune. But why were they smarter? Because back in those days, because you have to think of it the way that Aristotle and Montesquieu think of it. Laws are laws because of the situation you're in, but the world was a lot different 250 years ago. Only rich people could read because you could only read from your library, and so you had to be a friend of a rich person, hang out of his library, or be a rich person to read to know. Now everybody has the information. In the past, only the politicians who were paid by the government or rich people could travel back and forth to Washington, D.C. to know what's going on and to hang out with each other to know what's going on, but now everybody can know what's going on equally. And so the idea of needing that aristocratic element is not there as much because everybody's equal, so you can go more democrat. You go more democratic as people get more intelligent. That's why there was the French Revolution. People were just got more intelligent and they wanted to have more say. And then also from the evidence that it's used now as a weapon against the people from the oligarchy, having that certain class of people who are bought into power who then feed into even more power with the president. So but the problem is that if you get rid of the danger is if you get rid of something that's been around since the very beginning, that can open up a precedent, the floodgates to change other things in the Constitution. So like what I said, you forget the emoluments, well, maybe we should take it out of the Constitution. Well, people might be stupid and be like, oh yeah, well, if you take the electoral college out, well, that's part of the Constitution in the beginning. Let's go ahead and take out the emoluments clause, the rebellion clause, coup clause, the establishment of religion clause, the 2-term limit clause. They can't tell the difference. So that's why we need to really talk about the whole thing thoroughly. But I think it's time to get rid of the emolument, keep all those other clauses, but get rid of the electoral college, so that there's more democracy and less power, less avenues for the oligarchy now to maintain their control with it. So it kind of backfired. So anyways, my battery's about to die. But yeah, you should read the Federalist Papers, because it kind of kills all birds with one stone. It's a history lesson for ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and other and even Europe. And then it's also explains the Constitution, and it's the foundation of America. Okay, talk to you later. Thank you.